Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti, and welcome to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti again, and this is eLearnChat. And today we're joined by someone you probably know pretty well. He's been on the show before, but more than that, he's been in the e-learning field a long time. In fact, he even goes by the name eLearning Joe, even though his real name is Mark. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey.
We've got with us Joe Ganci today. He is a very well-known writer, author, speaker, trainer. He's done a lot of different things. Joe, how are you today?
I am well.
Always good to see you. We've had a little bit of audio issues this morning, and we lost Dawn. She was going to be here today as our co-host, and unfortunately, the hotel room probably didn't have enough bandwidth, and she couldn't get on. But even though she is, actually could have probably gone and visited you. She's in Delaware, not too far from where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so what's new in your life, Joe?
Oh, just plugging along. I still do what I love, been loving for the last 31 years. I'm creating learning, and I'm teaching, and I'm writing, and I'm doing all sorts of fun things. And I'm going to show off a little bobblehead that one of my clients gave me here. You see that? That's me. Yeah, it says eLearning Joe at the bottom.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I guess I think she liked me. That's why she gave it to me. I think it's not it's cute. So every morning I just bob its head a little bit to remind me.
I've never seen a custom bobblehead. That's actually pretty cool.
I know. It is fun. It kind of looks a lot like me, too. You know, dashingly handsome and all. Okay. So, what should we do there, Rick? Do you want to start me off with any questions, or should I just start talking?
There's a whole mess of things we can talk about. Now, you just came back from eLearning, correct?
I did. In fact, I was at eLearning week before last, or the week before that, but it kind of turned out interesting because the eLearning conference this year was held at the San Diego Sheraton Airport Hotel. It was a beautiful place. I was on the 10th floor of the hotel, and I had a beautiful view of the marina from the balcony, and I just fell in love with San Diego. Yeah. But luckily for me, the San Diego Airport Authority also wanted me to stay and teach Captivate 8. So I stayed an extra week, always in that same room the whole time, because the San Diego, Sheraton Airport Hotel was the one they actually recommended I stay at. So it was a nice coincidence. It turned out really well.
That's great. Actually, San Diego is beautiful. I did a contract there for 6 months a long time ago. This is actually a little over 30 years ago. And it was just nice. I almost moved down there. It wound up not, but it's just lovely.
Yeah, you're not too far from there. For me, it'd be a major move, but I'm tempted as well.
Yeah, for me, at that time, it was about an hour and a half. Now it's about, where we live, it's about 2.5, 2:45 to get there. It's not too bad. Mm-hmm. 6 weeks in traffic, but that's California.
Take that 405 for the 5 down, right?
Exactly. Actually, we go the back way. We take the 15, which is the one that heads north-south, and there's really not that much traffic heading down that way. If you go on the 405, it's awful. Yeah, there's a lot of people live down that way, and it gets pretty busy. Yeah. So, anything new, anything exciting at eLearn that you saw? Any trends?
So the one thing about eLearn that I absolutely adore is that it is a constantly changing conference. Most of the conferences I attend, they have a lot of the same kinds of discussions going on year to year, and they're very important discussions, and there are always a lot of newbies there as well. So overall, it's great to be at all these conferences that I go to and speak at. But the eLearn conference, for obvious reasons, is the one that changes the most year to year as our technology changes, as we are able to deliver better learning experiences to mobile devices and so on. So that's the one that kind of excites me the most, just because I'm learning so many new things every year there too, the leading edge of everything. So overall, the eLearn conference is probably becoming one of my very favorites. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's a fun one. It's not too big, which is good. It's not overcrowded with people, and yet, there's a lot of good, fun stuff happening over there. Now, we were going to talk a little bit today about the future of e-learning, and either what it should be, what we want it to be, or where it's actually going. So
Well, I mean, clearly it's a good segue because the whole feature is about, well, part and parcel with mobile learning. Absolutely, we're not going to go away from desktop and laptop learning, but the fact that everybody now has a smartphone in their pocket, or soon will have, the fact that not just iPads but Android tablets have become the de rigueur device that people are using in their homes when they're walking around or when they're sitting on the couch or whatever. The fact that our devices have become so powerful, it's amazing to me that from my cell phone I can now control the temperature in my house. I can do all sorts of other things with it. It's taken the place of so many of the devices. But along with that comes the power to create some and deliver some really nice learning on those devices too. So the future of e-learning is in essence synonymous with the future of mobile learning, because I believe that more and more we're going to be doing that. Now, it's interesting that even before mobile learning started becoming important in this field, we already saw that learning was changing over time. I've been doing this for 31 years, and it was pretty normal for a long time to have a contract. For instance, I do custom learning, so I would get these contracts to deliver 20 hours of learning, or even 40 hours of learning, and people would be sitting in computer labs at their companies rather than at their desks, and certainly they didn't have mobile devices. And it was one of those things where, yeah, it was kind of like sitting in a classroom for a week. You're not going to remember most of it after the fact. But that's the way it was back then. And then we started seeing that there was a push to have shorter and sweeter and more focused learning. So we started getting smaller lessons, shorter lessons, from 20 minutes down to 15, down to 10. Now even the 3 to 5 minute lessons are pretty normal.
Yeah.
That also works really well with mobile, because nobody wants to sit and stare at a small screen for 20 minutes straight, interacting with it, unless of course they're playing, Candy Crush or some other game. But when it comes to learning, people's attention span is not going to be such that we can really deliver very long lessons on those devices, aside from the fact that bandwidth and other technology is going to also hinder long lessons. So yeah, it's kind of all coming together. I mean, not only design-wise did we see that we needed to cut down on our lessons because people were not able to focus for such a long time on lessons, but also the fact that we have technology that lends itself well to having shorter lessons too, kind of all works together really well. So I see us hitting a tipping point where, of course, our lessons can be too short. I think we're kind of there now. 3 to 5 minutes seems to be a pretty good span of time for most subject matters. Some are obviously going to take longer. Other ones can be done a little shorter. But I really don't see, how much I can learn in 20 seconds, for instance. I need to at least get some instruction in there.
Well, it's sort of interesting because if you look at things like the news, which is all sound bites, you don't really learn from that. You get a very tilted picture of whatever side you're listening to or whatever is being reported. You go, somehow we're missing the dialogue there. We're missing beyond that. And I think you're right. If we get to e-learning to the point where it's a minute, it's probably too short, especially if we're trying to make any specific points. And they're saying that, what is it? I think 15 minutes is about maximum adult focus time. After that, it's dropping pretty darn quickly, with about 5 to 10 being optimal.
Yeah, although, you look at our kids, for instance, or even, our peers, and they're certainly able to stay on a game, World of Warcraft or whatever, for hours at a time.
But that's an addiction. That's different.
What is addicting about it? It's the fact that it's constantly changing, constantly interacting. You're constantly being challenged and so on. And that's a lot of what we are needing to put into our learning too, to make it more effective, is challenging the learner. That's a different subject matter, but one that I strongly believe in too. I absolutely abhor using linear learnings, next.
Right.
Is I'm done. I hate that. I really hate that because nobody is learning from it. It's a complete waste of time and money.
Yep.
And so very little effective. I saw something the other day that I thought was really appropriate. It said something I wish I had put in front of me, but it said, for those who want to learn, nothing can stop them. For those who don't want to learn, nothing can help them. Okay, so yeah, if you give somebody a PowerPoint and they really, really are motivated to learn, they're going to glean everything they can out of it. And if someone doesn't want to learn, you can give them the very best e-learning, and it's probably not going to work. But if you give them good, solid, challenging learning, it's going to get most people. It's going to get those who want to learn, and those who don't want to learn may find themselves engaged enough that they're going to actually go through the process of learning.
Well, that's a good point, because I think a lot of companies spend a lot of money on compliance training, which unfortunately is not exactly stimulating or exciting more often than not, because the lawyers get involved. They can't have humor. You can't do this, you can't do that. So it's dry, long content. Oh, you've got to be at that computer 1 hour straight. Oh. And most people just go, oh, God, I've got to take another compliance course. And they're not exactly stimulating. They're not fun. They're required. And that's probably what you see a lot of e-learning doing. So I think that's part of the reputational issue of e-learning. I've talked to people in large corporations, as have you, and when you start saying, well, we can make an e-learning course out of that, that's compliance. No, it's not like compliance. We can actually have some fun with this.
And you know what, too? I'll sorry to interrupt. I hear this all the time in the classes I teach, too. I'll teach them how to create very engaging, challenge-based learning, and then I'm like, well, but we do software, or we have to do OSHA regulations or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so here's what I say to these people, okay? I make them think in a different way. So someone says to me, we need to teach software, so there's no way we can make it engaging or interactive. And I say, okay, well, what's the point of teaching the software? And they say, what do you mean? And, well, what's the software good for? There's no software on earth that people use that doesn't serve a purpose of some kind. It's built for a reason. Even games are built for a reason. They're to alleviate boredom. And those that are, of course, business-oriented types of applications, they're there to solve problems, to make things more productive, whatever. So I got this one in my class a couple of weeks ago that said, well, we have to teach them how to fill out the XYZ form. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's the point of the XYZ form? Well, it's a requisition form that, makes it so that we have to get all the data in there. Well, why do you have to do that? Well, it's because, and so finally in the end, after several whys, it came to, well, if we don't do this, the company's going to lose time and money. Okay, well, now I get it. Now there's your challenge right there. How to help the company not lose time and money, how to make it productive. And so the challenge then comes in, you challenge the learner to say, let's see how much time and money you can save the company by, doing this. Oh, wow, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Now, when it comes to compliance, you're absolutely right that in most cases, it's not necessarily that you can't come up with engaging learning. And it's not always just because the lawyers get involved and so on, although that's a huge factor as well. But it's because so often the compliance training is in response to a regulation that the company just wants to cover their butt. They're like, yep. Okay, we have to do anti-sexual harassment, we have to do safe handling of chemicals and so on. They would do well to think about the fact that having a better e-learning course on safe handling of chemicals would help them a lot more than just making sure that they have fulfilled their obligation to the regulation in such that if the person does create a chemical hazard, they can't be held liable because they did provide the training, so to speak. But so much better if their employees are not hurting themselves and others, So I speak a lot on compliance training, and I speak about the fact that don't think of it as just fulfilling an obligation on your part, but think of it, that the regulation is usually, not always, but usually there for a good reason. Let's focus on that reason and see if we can't, make learning that actually is going to save lives or at least save jobs or save whatever,
Well, there's also another thing. A lot of people say, okay, by doing training, good or bad, now we've complied with the training and now we're indemnified. And that is proving in court not to be valid anymore. A lot of lawyers are going after training content, and they have paid off training advisors who will say, no, that content doesn't really teach anything. There's no retention. So
You say paid off training advisors. Are you saying that they're not telling the truth? Because it sounds
no, I think that just like any other paid witness or paid expert, they will gear it to whatever the defense or the prosecution or whatever anybody wants. So there's a lot of subjective. It's not objective in training as much as it's pretty subjective.
Yeah.
So how do you say, well, this content wasn't good or this content is good? Well, I'll know it when I see it, kind of thing. It might be good, it might not be good, but maybe for one person it isn't, but for another it is.
Right.
And so that's why you get into that legal issue where you don't want. I don't think subpoenaing training records are going to prove anything. It's just going to make more money for lawyers again. But it's an interesting thing that's happening because they're figuring out, well, yeah, if training content's boring and there's no retentive quality to it, then they haven't been trained and the company's liable.
Very interesting. I had not really been in tune on that, and hearing that now, it strikes me as a very real thing. I mean, obviously, if you let's take it to the extreme. If you say to someone, "Hey, don't sexually harass people," and they go, "Okay," and you have them sign a statement, is that training? Just because you told them not to do it.
Right.
Okay, that would be the extreme. If you do not much better than that, just by giving them, a quick PowerPoint with telling them regulations, and oh, by the way, you could lose your job if you do that. It's probably not good enough. They have to understand the ramifications, and sometimes it's really not just the intellectual part of it. It's the emotional part too.
Sure.
Someone may not really understand or get it as to why using certain expressions, regarding the opposite sex, could really be hurtful. In their mind, it's like, oh, that's no big deal. But if you help them to see it from the other point of view, it can really go a long way to helping people not just understand, but also to be empathetic and be able to change their behavior based not just on understanding the concept, but also feeling it, understanding it to the point of a real recognition of the situation when it arises, and being able to respond clearly to that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to teach something that, somebody who's willing to sexually harass, as an example, is probably not that inclined to really care about the training.
True.
There's already some underlying other issue going on. So, those are tough questions. And, I do think there's probably way too much liability on a company for that. On the other hand, if the company knows they've got a problem and they don't address it, well, yeah, then you have an issue. But, you try to always get the things before they become a problem. We've done a lot of compliance training and a lot of OSHA training, and it's an interesting field. And we actually had one client who let us have fun with it, and that was great. We actually were able to do some creative writing and make it interesting. And some of those courses, believe it or not, are still in use about 13, 14, actually 15 years later. And I just mind-boggled that, wow, they every 2 years they go through it. And it was sort of fun. I don't know if they're as much fun the second and third time around, but at least the first time around they were fun.
I'm not surprised because, some kinds of training are rather timeless. It's to handle a chemical
Right.
15 years ago is probably not much different than handling the same chemical now.
Right.
If they had the procedure done right back then, for instance. In addition to that, if you created the learning so that it's not necessarily always the same exact learning, that it patterns itself to the learner, it individualizes itself to the learner, and also perhaps comes up sometimes with different approaches. Kind of like, okay, the standard thing there would be like if you had a quiz that had random questions drawn from a pool, right? So you take the quiz more than once, and you're not going to get the same exact quiz.
Right.
You'll get similar content, but not the exact questions. Okay, so if you think about it that way, if you create learning like that as well, where your challenges and scenarios and so on may not be always exactly the same in the same order, sure, you can take it 3 or 4 or 5 times and not get the exact same course, but each one is comparable to the other regarding its validity. yeah, it's credibility. So.
That's true. Now, recently, you said you were teaching Captivate 8. What's your experience been with Captivate 8?
Captivate is really cool. It's the first tool I've seen, at least a major tool that I've seen, that has responsive design built in. And that is a huge calling card for Captivate 8. Yes, they've made a lot of other improvements as well. But responsive design is wonderful because with mobile learning, you need to accommodate different kinds of devices, right? So that's been the problem all along is if we needed to create, if I needed to create a learning piece that would work with, for desktop and also for tablet and also for cell phone, although that's not as common, I had to look for the lowest common denominator and then accommodate that. So if it meant that my tablet, for instance, had lower resolution than my desktop, I would have to go with the lower resolution. Your desktop then would not look very good because it was accommodating the lesser of the two devices. Well, with responsive design, you are able to set up your course so that it has 3 different layouts, 3 different ways of presenting itself depending on the device. You can specify the resolution for each device individually, and then as you create your course, it will automatically adjust itself for each of the other 2 devices, and you can see all 3 views side by side, and you can also customize each view to the nth degree. So if you create your desktop version, for instance, you switch over and look at the tablet version, and you want to move something on there, great, move it on the tablet version. It won't affect the desktop version. It's got this grandparent-parent-child relationship going, so making changes at the desktop level will make the change also at the parent and child level. Making a change at the parent level will make the change also at the child level. Making a change at the child level only affects the child. So that way, it's a beautiful, beautiful way of creating all 3 rather rapidly and well, so that you're delivering the very best experience on desktop, on mobile tablets, and on cell phone devices as well. So it's great. I mean, it's phenomenal in my view, and yes, there have been several other improvements, but that's really the biggie for me.
Yeah, it's funny. Adobe seems to be implementing that all across the board. I know with their Muse product, they had that. I think they've got that with InDesign. They're one of the first to really aggressively attack the whole issue of multi-platform, multi-device, responsive. It's probably not a bad thing right now. It's probably very important.
I think it's becoming more and more important every day. I think it's going to be one of those things that in a year or so, any tool that doesn't address responsive design is going to find itself, behind the times. And so I'm sure that a lot of other tool vendors are now working hard to see about, doing that. They all have addressed the idea of HTML5, or most of them have. They've all addressed the idea of delivering to mobile, but not to the degree that Adobe has. You're right. And while I do use several different tools, and I use, Storyline, and I use PowerPoint tools sometimes, although not as often, I use other tools too, and each of them has strengths and weaknesses, of course. I think Captivate 8, Adobe has really hit it out of the park, and now everybody else is playing catch up.
Have you seen the new Presenter? Because I heard that just came out. I haven't seen it yet. And they're adding a lot of the same capabilities as Captivate, or at least some of them are kind of filtering off to Adobe Presenter. I think it's Presenter 12, if I'm not wrong.
Presenter 10, actually.
Oh, 10, I'm sorry.
Yes, my review for Presenter 10 will be coming out next Tuesday in Learning Solutions Magazine. The eLearning Guild. So my Captivate 8 review was it 2 months ago? Last month? I forget. But this month will be the Presenter 8 review.
Okay, great. You want to give us a sneak peek? Any one salient point?
Well, it certainly does not address responsive design per se.
Okay.
It does have a lot of improvements overall. One of the things I list in my review 10 different improvements that have occurred, and the biggest one is, of course, that it does now deliver to HTML5 as well. The nice thing about Presenter, which was already something that was in Captivate with an earlier version, but now Captivate's gone further with it, is that if you deliver to both mobile and to desktop, you can choose, do I want to deliver to Flash alone, do I want to deliver to HTML5 alone, or do I want to deliver to both?
Okay.
When you choose that option, why would you choose Swift nowadays anyway? Well, because IE8 and a lot of other standard browsers in organizations have still not been updated and will continue to be the standard for a while. Well, those run Flash really well, but they don't run HTML5 at all, practically.
Right.
So you do need to still have that Swift option, right, to be able to deliver. HTML5 obviously is one that is meant mostly for mobile, but most browsers, newer versions of browsers on desktops are also accommodating that to a degree. Not completely yet, but to a degree. Chrome is the furthest along with that one. But what if you publish to both? What happens is really, really clever. You end up with a third HTML5. You get the HTML file for the Swift, you get the HTML file for the HTML5 version, then you get another one called multi-screen. And what the multi-screen option does in Captivate, and it's very similar in Presenter now, is that you can point everybody to that one file. Desktop, mobile, doesn't matter. It then queries the device behind the scenes very, very rapidly. You don't, take a second, and then determines, this guy has Flash in his browser, so I'm going to deliver Flash, the Flash version. Oh, she's got a mobile device and without Flash, so I'm going to deliver the HTML5 version to her. And the reason why it also, you may want to consider HTML5 for mobile as well, or sorry, Swift, besides the fact that you might have an older browser. Swift files tend to be very compressed, and they tend to be very much fewer files. You have a Swift file that contains basically your whole course, but then you have a few other ancillary files too, sometimes video files and so on. HTML5 is no different from HTML ever, which means that everything is a separate file, and that means that you're going to get a larger folder of files. You're going to get a lot more files in it, and it's going to be a little slower to start because it's having to grab so many different files and bring them together. So that's sort of the good and bad. I mean, HTML5 is really no different in the way it delivers your lessons. It delivers it using many different files,
right?
As Swift is compressed. So even if all your browsers supported HTML5, you still might want to have the Swift version available for those who can support it because it's going to be a faster version.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. A lot of people don't think about the browser as being an integral part of the deployment process, but when you've got HTML5, you're relying on the speed of the browser to interpret that HTML5 versus Flash, was it's going to be pretty much the same speed no matter what browser you're on.
Yep, it's true. That's absolutely right.
Those are little things. Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat box about what other elements do I really like in Captivate 8. Should I answer that now, or do you want me to wait?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, let me make a point that Captivate 8 has really tried to bridge the gap between novices and experts. And so what they've done is they've made a simpler interface overall. I have a separate article that was printed in Learning Solutions magazine after my Captivate 8 one that tells you how you can set up your workspace in any way you like. So, I mean, I've set up my workspace so everything's available to me. But out of the box, it looks very plain. It looks very clean. And that's nice for novices who don't want to be overwhelmed, because that's usually what you hear from them is like, there's too much here, there's too much here. Well, they're going to have an easier way of easier entry into Captivate. But some of the other features I really like is, well, speaking of mobile, let's talk about that. Now you can have, so that when you're delivering to, say, a cell phone or to an iPad or whatever, you've got a lot of those same options that you normally have in other apps. You can do pinch and zoom, so you can pinch in and out to zoom in and out. You've got geolocation options, so you can actually query the device to see, where the person actually is geographically, and then deliver customized learning to that person depending on that. Just like you do with Yelp or any other app that's on your mobile device, and it says it wants to know where you are, so it can recommend the best restaurants in your area or where the closest gas station is or whatever. Well, you can now have it so that that works as well. If you are going to have some kind of linear approach to your learning, which, sometimes people do, you can also use swiping to go from slide to slide, for instance. That's a little more common in something like Presenter than in Captivate, but that's, those are now built into there as well.
Now, I just thought of something existential.
What's that?
If you're swiping now, if you're on mobile, you don't have to hear click the next button to continue.
Well, yes. And really,
I can just hear it now. Swipe the screen to continue.
Swipe the screen. That's right, swipe it. And then you mishear to sweep it, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
Sweep.
And then somebody's going to go wipe the screen? Okay. And they just start wiping it. It's just, I just see it.
Wipe plus sweep equals swipe. I got you. All right, some of the other improvements in there. If you do like JavaScript, it's a scripting language, and I actually do use it quite a bit with Captivate to create really powerful interfaces between Captivate and other tools. For instance, just this past year, I built a JavaScript interface between Captivate and a 3D simulator of electronic wires and such. Instead of using a box on your desk, you're using an online system that a company had created, and I worked with that company to provide me with information through JavaScript so I could test the learner in their actual 3D simulator.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Now JavaScript is even better supported. Now you don't just have the ability to exchange variables, but you can also have event listeners. You can have variables and functions, calls, and so on as well. All right, so there's a bunch of new characters in there. There's 2 new voices if you're doing text-to-speech. Text captions. Part of this comes from the responsive design idea, but text captions can now adjust in font size depending on the device resolution and so on. You can now include HTML5 animations and edge animations directly. You can include PDF files directly. That's kind of cool because that's a lot of times what we have to do. Smart Shapes, which I believe is one of the best new features in Captivate as of version 6, have been improved again. You now have rollover states for those. You have down states for those. You can save your Smart Shapes and reuse them later too. Smart Shapes are taking the place of a lot of things like text captions. I don't use text captions very much anymore. I use Smart Shapes instead. I don't use direct images anymore. I use smart Shapes that hold images in them. Why? Because Smart Shapes have more versatility. They're more flexible. You can shape them any way you like and do it and you can create buttons out of them too. So again, that's another thing I don't do too much of anymore is create custom buttons because I can use Smart Shapes for that.
So Joe, it's interesting because I think this is the first version of Captivate in quite a while where they're leading again. They took a leading position in some of the things they're doing. They're innovating. Usually they're reactive. This time, Adobe was much more innovative, at least in the approach.
Yeah, I do believe that you're right, that in many cases they've been accused of being more reactionary. But at the same time, they've had their share of leading things going on.
Sure.
Overall, you're right. I think that this is the first time they've jumped far ahead and said, now you guys catch up with us. Okay, well, there's a few other options there too.
So we'll read the article.
Yeah. If I tell you too much, you won't read the article.
That's right. So stay tuned. Read the article. Is that coming out next week?
Yes, next Tuesday. And it looks like Leva from Belgium has joined us in the chat as well.
Hello, Leva.
Yes, who's one of my very favorite people in the world. She's probably the biggest Captivate expert in the world over there. She's fantastic. Anyway, let's see. Yes, she mentions that Jim Leichleiter, who I greatly admire as well, he's excited for the JavaScript because he's the guy who actually taught me a few things about JavaScript when I hadn't used it for years, and then I finally got back to it. And I went to Jim and I said, Jim, let me pay you a little bit here, and you can tell me a little bit. And then he was able to get me over a couple of humps. So he's a very, very knowledgeable guy.
One thing interesting about JavaScript right now is, everybody's been talking XML for years, and in a very short time, JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation, is now really becoming as popular, if not more popular, because it's easier. and it really works well, which means if you're doing things, I don't know if you were using JSON for what you were doing with the 3D thing, but you could pass parameters and values or key values easily using JSON and then tie that to any data source, and Captivate can actually pull in literally live data. Be kind of cool. I haven't tried it yet with Captivate, but that would actually be kind of a cool simulation feature if needed.
Yeah, what I did was a little bit different, but it's the same idea. I mean, we were grabbing data from another project. It was being pushed to us, so we were pulling it in, and it worked really well. Leva also mentions some of the other things that. Oh, no, sorry, this is Kirsten now, who mentions, or no, I think it's Leva who's telling Kirsten that she also loves the different states with shape buttons. I mentioned the rollover and down states are now available. Shared actions have been enhanced. That's a biggie. So if you create advanced actions in Captivate, yes, you already have the ability to make shared actions out of those, but now those have been enhanced quite a bit. Interactions that are built into Captivate there's a couple of extra ones now, but also they've been enhanced, so you can change out the colors, the themes, and for that matter, I believe, and Leva can address this because she's much more inclined to work with other languages, that you can also change out languages in many cases and maybe not all. Yep, there is a sample file with Captivate 8 about JavaScript, which is cool. And, okay, so, yep, better color management. Leva is a big user of the swatches in Captivate, which I have not.
I've never used them,
Yeah, I haven't used them that much, but she loves them, so I gotta figure out how to use them better. I need to go look at Leva's website to see how she's using them too, because she's very enamored of them, and I have to figure out why.
It's probably from her JavaScript, from her Photoshop background.
Probably, yeah. That's probably why. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's see what else. We are almost out of time. Are you going to be talking anywhere soon? Any places people can come and see you?
Wow, I am lucky enough to have come off several weeks of travel, but now I'm home here in DC area for the summer. There is an event here in August, right near my home. That's the SALT conference, Society for Applied Learning Technology. That's going to be held in Reston, Virginia in August. The website is salt.org. They were, interesting enough, back in 1986 when I graduated college and came out to Virginia to work for Ford Aerospace. They sent me to my first eLearning conference, and it was a SALT conference, and it was in Orlando in February, and that's been where it's held every year, February, March in Orlando, and then August time period in DC. And it was huge back then, and there were really no other conferences at the time. Maybe ASTD was having a conference. At any rate, it's still held today. It kind of came back after a long time, but it's been held now for several years. It's a smaller conference, a little more intimate, but some really, really smart people there too. Phil Kousel normally is there. I'm not sure if he's there this time. Myself, and this year the keynote speaker is going to be Glenn Bull, who's got some really exciting innovations going on in the area of e-learning as well.
And he's a heck of a nice guy too.
He is. He's a Kiwi from New Zealand who now lives in New Jersey, and he's been a friend of mine for many years.
Oh, he lives out here now? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he moved to New Jersey with his family last year. I went up there and visited him in November because we were collaborating on a few things. But he's opening up the U.S. market to his new tools.
Well, good for him.
Now that they've conquered New Zealand, they're ready to conquer the big leagues here in the United States.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And anything else regarding tools and e-learning before we wrap up today? Anything to keep an eye out on that you see on the horizon?
As I said earlier, I believe that every tool vendor now has their work cut out for them. They're going to be needing to address the ability to build responsive design or at least make it a lot simpler to get to mobile as well. The idea that we can now control what happens on the mobile devices, it's really interesting to me because we talked at the very beginning of this session about how we went from desktop to now also including mobile, and how all these lessons have gotten shorter and shorter as well over time, even before mobile came along. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm just wondering how much longer we will be relying mostly on desktop versus mobile for learning. Now, yeah, mobile already is being used over 50% to access websites and stuff. I use it a lot. My cell phone, I use it a lot as well to access websites and other places on the internet that I need to get to. But if we're really going to be going more and more to mobile, that means we're going to be able to take advantage of those mobile features that are not available to us on desktops. You know, we don't have the ability to have, well, in some cases we have pinch and zoom, yes, in some cases we have geolocation, yes, but we don't have that same kind of consistency that we have with mobile devices. So I'm kind of interested to see where we go from there. To me, the most important new thing that, it's not new at all, but for me it's something I've been finally focusing on a lot more is analytics. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that you really can't tell whether your learning is good or bad, especially in the long term, without having real good analytics built into your material. And that means knowing, not just for the individual, but for the aggregate, exactly how people do all along the way. I'm not talking about how many people passed a lesson or how many people passed a quiz or how many people missed this one question, but really understanding to the nth degree where the limitations are in the individual's knowledge and also in the aggregate knowledge, understanding why people are doing what they're doing, not just what they know, what they don't know, but why they know what they know, why they don't know what they don't know. To that end, I'm seeing some pretty exciting things happening and I believe Glenn Bowe will be addressing a lot of that in his keynote as well. At the point where we finally realize just how important analytics are, we might stop spending so much time and money creating really bad e-learning, because it will prove itself to be ineffective. It will prove itself to be a big waste of time and money. Only by creating truly effective learning are we going to be able to effectively change the productivity and behavior of people. And as such, I think analytics is going to help us get there.
And this is an area where LMSs need to kind of step up to the plate a little bit and do a better job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Among other things. But, well, Joe, as always, a pleasure. It's always good talking. I missed you at the last show, but I'll catch you hopefully at DevLearn.
I'll definitely be at DevLearn, and I'll be at the online learning conference that Training Magazine has in Chicago in September. In September, I'll be going to that in Chicago, and then immediately after, my wife and I will be going to visit our family in Italy.
Yeah, great.
And we'll be coming back, and I'll be going to at the end of October is the DevLearn conference that I'll be attending as well, and speaking at as well. So
that sounds good. Well, hang in there. Don't hang up yet. We're going to say goodbye to the audience, and I'll get right back with you. Anyway, thanks for watching if you're in the chat room, and if you're watching the recordings, please subscribe and let us know what you think. Have a good one, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.